everyone. Thank you for joining us. So I have author and friend Moonwater SilverClaw. She was the very first person who I'd interviewed a long time ago at PantheaCon. What was that? That was PantheaCon 2013 or 2014 or 2015?
I don't know.
It was a couple of years ago. Yeah. So anyhow, so she was the very first person who I interviewed. So it's kind of anyhow. So, and at the time she had written her third or fourth book, and now you're on your sixth book, and you are becoming quite the prolific writer. It is amazing.
I have a lot of help.
Have you?
A lot.
Well, that's good, but still, I mean, that's just writing is just amazing. I don't know how some people do it, but so we're going to be talking about your latest book, which is your sixth book, which is called Being a Wiccan Badass. And I'm going to let Moonwater take it away from here. But also in the chat, if there's any problems with audio or any problems on your end, please let me know, because I am checking out the chat. And then later on, maybe we're going to be doing this for about an hour. So probably maybe the last half hour, last 15 minutes of the broadcast, we will do we'll take some questions from the viewers. So what is and how does one become a Wiccan badass?
Well, great question. It really comes down to holding 6 actions to be a Wiccan badass. And I cover this in my book. The first one is connect with God and Goddess. You have to have a connection there to be a Wiccan badass. And just to be Wiccan in general, it kind of helps. But also to be smart and knowledgeable. And there is a difference between the two, you know. Smart is being able to think on your feet and being able to use knowledge appropriately, whereas knowledge is a storehouse or a group of knowledge that you have available to you. And another thing that a Wiccan badass has is, they have a lot of energy to use. I know from my personal experience that when I was, on my path, I had a terrible time with having a lot of energy, and Wiccan badass, they definitely have the energy and they know how to use it. And that brings us to the fourth thing is, they make things happen. They get things done. Another thing that I talk about in my book, which is also part of a Wiccan badass, is being able to protect yourself from negative entities or just mean people in general. And we know we all have those in our lives. And the last thing is a Wiccan badass serves her community. So that's really the essence of what it is, and they even bring it down to the basic 3 things is that the Wiccan badass sees his choices, gains knowledge, and acts decisively. So it really comes down to those points.
Mm-hmm. And so for example, you had said being able to protect yourself from others and entities. So in the book, do you kind of go over how one would go about doing possibly protection spells? Or because unfortunately I didn't have a chance to read your book.
That's okay. You've got plenty of chance still.
Okay.
Let's see if I can. I'm trying to find the page, but I'm not finding the exact page, but I do cover that.
Okay.
I cover how to get positive friends in your life. I cover basically how to create a spell and how to actually, go through a step-by-step formula to create powerful spells that work for you and you alone.
Okay. Yeah, because because I know a lot of my viewers are, well, I shouldn't say a lot of my viewers, I should say a couple of them I know are relatively new to the Wiccan path. They're kind of interested in it. They're kind of checking it out and curious about it. What do you? I know that on your website, which I'll put a link to below. I didn't put it on there, but it's on here. I think it's is it www.childrenofthehiddenpath or? Well, you probably obviously know it.
GoddessHasYourBack.com.
GoddessHasYourBack.com. Okay. So, and on your website, you actually recommend a couple of books that people can check out.
I actually have a list for starters, for people who are beginning the craft. And these are books that I highly recommend that are, not the fluffy bunny kind of stuff. It's more of, the history and what's actually was going on in the craft and learning from those people who started the craft. So I'll have things like Gerald B. Gardner, Valiente, a lot of different ones, that were really the pivotal point on, creating the craft.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people who, I personally find, I'm sure you're well aware, that I find studying craft history. Now, when I say craft history, I'm meaning like mostly the British, people call the British traditional Wicca path. But I don't know, I don't like that British part. I'm starting to call it like traditional Wiccan path. But there's a lot of history there, and I think it's really good to be rooted in your past and to be rooted in something that's substantial, and I think that is important.
It's always important to know where we came from and why we do the things we do. And one thing that I have a burr up my behind about is people using the word warlock in the wrong way. And if they just looked at the history and, looked back and looked through the documents, they would know that it was an oath breaker. And it's not a male witch. So I talk about that too in my book because I get to.
Right. It's your book. You can talk about it if you want to, right? Yeah, well, it's funny. There's a lot of kind of layman people, or I should say layman, non-Wiccan, whatever, who kind of think that like Wiccan or witch is like a female, and then warlock is a male. And this is something that's it's been perpetuating since like the 60s. It's really an old term that people still use. I know a couple of people who want to reclaim the word warlock. And that's honestly, that's their business. If somebody wants to call themselves Lord Voldemort of the purple robe of whatever, they can call themselves that.
The high Twinkie of Twinkie-nim.
Hey, you want to call yourself the high Twinkie of Twinkieland, more twink to you, But I think it does kind of confuse some people, and so they go, oh, well, you're a male witch, so you must be a warlock, and then you kind of have to explain it to them.
Yeah, and it's like, no, that's really insulting, don't say that.
And so this is now your 6th book that you've written, so you are really, you're really becoming quite a prolific writer, so that's very good.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so I know that I read the hidden. I think it's the hidden path for the children.
Hidden
of the
Children
Goddess.
of the Goddess.
Yeah. So, for example, what makes that book different from this one? Is there kind of like a clear kind of description that you could give, or is it a little more complex than that?
The Hidden Children of the Goddess, which you can get on Amazon, by the way, or order it through Barnes & Noble, it's basically a Wicca 101, and I really try to touch on a lot of different magical practices in there, and really try to give you a rounded education, starter education on what things are and the terms and things like that Wiccans use and do. This one's more the Be a Wiccan Badass is more of a book about just finding your inner strength and your inner power. So it's not necessarily, I mean, it does teach you a lot of things that you would, sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
It teaches you a lot about being your own person, being comfortable in your shell, being able to be comfortable in your shoes and be able to be who you are and what you are and be okay with that. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of people that they have issues with people being Wiccan and stuff like that, but this one is more of, it's okay.
Mm-hmm. So you mean like maybe people who kind of view Wicca as being kind of like new agey or fluffy or
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, the fluffy bunny stuff, but this is the book here. That's the Wicca 101. Mm-hmm. So, and it's got a lot of really good stuff in it. So, if you wanted to start out with an intro book, that would be a really good book.
Mm-hmm. So is the being a Wiccan badass, would you say that that's not really like a beginner's book? It's like maybe somebody who's been on this path for a little while wants to delve a little deeper, or do you think it could stand alone as a book?
It can stand alone. I've actually had somebody review it already, and they were saying that it was good for novices and people who've been practicing for a while. So, I mean, it's really got some good stuff in there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And kind of like what you were talking about earlier about the I think, unfortunately, and I don't know if there's any way to reverse it at all. I think it's just going to maybe just take some time. But I think there was such a proliferation of the use of the term Wicca, especially I would say from maybe late 70s to the 90s. Wow, maybe even like let's say 80s through the 90s, mid 90s. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, even later. Let's say just 80s through 90s, like 20 years, where it was just everybody was just writing about Wicca, and everything was Wicca, and it was like you looked and there was another book out, something Wicca, Norse Wicca, Celtic Wicca. I mean, there was all these various things, and I think that it just got oversaturated, and people just got sick of it, and I think and then the writers themselves, I think they were trying to churn out books after books after books. And there was no really substance to it. It was just kind of like the same thing, the same format, just kind of like rewritten. And I think that's one of the reasons why then we had this kind of growth now of people who are exploring other forms of witchcraft. Like if you look at the witchcraft term, the umbrella, and then Wicca is kind of underneath it. And I think they decided to kind of look for other stuff. So I'm hoping that maybe at some point it'll kind of come back around and people will see Wicca for what it is and what I think ultimately it was intended to be, and not what it was kind of forced to be.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what makes my books different, is that I actually try to write from my own experiences, and I talk about I had this situation, I did this, it worked, and this is how to do it. Versus a lot of the books talk at you or are really hard to understand. I'm also dyslexic, so that puts a whole new meaning on writer. But I try to make it as easy and as straightforward as possible in my writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because sometimes you'll at least I will read an author, and I feel and I can read sort of between the lines of how they're actually kind of like fill it and like stretch those sentences and include other stuff that's kind of unnecessary. And you kind of, when you read some books, you sort of pick that up. Like, okay, they really could have explained that a lot easier with a lot fewer words. I think Crowley was much like that, where he just kind of like filled the book with just stuff. And then there was just like sections that were actually rather important. Yeah. And so let's see. I'm going to look back at our questions for a second here. Kind of misplaced that.
Oh.
Oh yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Moonwater. I'm sure the last time we talked, we probably discussed this, but how long have you been practicing, and how did you get into your path or the craft?
Well, I've been practicing since the 90s, and I had a very interesting experience. I don't know where I heard it, but I heard the word Wicca. And so I went to a, bookstore, which we still had back then. Yes, there's so many that are disappearing now. It's all horrible.
It is.
But I went there and I asked the person at the counter, do you have any books on Wicca? And she happened to be a witch, and she got excited, and she went back, and I had a whole armful of books, and she kept adding more and more and more and more, and I'm like, how about just one that you would recommend for somebody who's beginning, And that's when I actually bought and took home Scott Cunningham's the book Wicca for a Solitary Practitioner. And I was reading that, and I go, I do that. I do that. I do that. And it was just like coming home. It's like everything that I had been doing as a kid and up to that point was actually what witches and Wiccans do. And I was really stunned that, there was other people that did the same thing that I did, so I didn't feel so alone and, weird. But it just kept growing, and then I eventually became a solitary practitioner after that, and I read some more, and I kept reading. And I think it was in 2003 when I actually started group work with the Coven. So, and I've been in the Coven ever since, and I'm a part of 2 different ones now.
Wow. And how did you find a Coven? How does one go about doing that?
Well,
or what is your advice for people who are interested in that?
One thing I could suggest is go to pagan gatherings, meet people. Another thing is, if you're looking for British traditional witchcraft, then you can go to the New Wiccan Church. And I think I gave you the link for that. And then COG is another resource too, Covenant of the Goddess.
Okay, yeah, and both of those I'll put links to below. I know we were having some trouble finding the New Wiccan Church website. I think you'd mentioned that they had moved, but they do still have a Facebook page. So
they have a Facebook page.
Yeah, so I'll put the link to the Facebook page, and if people are interested in that, they can contact them through the Facebook page, I'm sure. And then when whatever's going on with their website, when they get that resolved or fixed, or somehow, I'm sure somebody can help you. And the COG website is one I will also put down below. Now I haven't really visited the COG website too much. Do they really help people who are individuals, or are they more just kind of like for groups that are already established?
Individuals can join COG.
Okay.
It's a little more rigorous on you need to have people who vouch for you and things like that. But as far as I understand it, yeah, you can join COG as a solitaire.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you can do that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I wasn't too sure. Because I've looked into COG a couple of times, and I think the group that I'm currently in is a part of COG. I'll have to double check. I think they are. But yeah, because I wasn't too sure if individuals could join COG, but it sounds like they can.
Mm-hmm.
And now, if somebody was interested in just learning more about what Wicca is, I know that we touched on it earlier, but are there particular books that you think would be good for them to read to kind of give them a good snapshot of what Wicca is, or British traditional Wicca?
Of course. Well, as I said before, my book, The Hidden Children of the Goddess, is a great 101 book. It gives you a lot of different ways to learn about how to do magic and learn about the history and different things like that. Another one that, when you get started on it and everything, there's The Goddess Has Your Back, which is a book about, self-esteem, but it also has the Esbats and Sabbats, and it has rituals for each one of those. So you can actually go through and celebrate the year with that book.
Oh, nice. And it sort of is written in that way for solitaries, like to be able to practice Esbats and...
I kind of, because I didn't know who would be reading the book, I kind of did it a little mix.
Okay.
So, but it can be easily tailored, to one or the other once you know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so they can kind of mix it to suit themselves for a solitary practice. Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Let me see. Oh, and then the other question I had for you was, how would you explain your beliefs or your practices to someone who maybe doesn't know anything about what you practice or what you call yourself? Like, say, somebody you kind of met, like a relationship, or maybe somebody you met at work or whatever, and they were curious about what it is that you do. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Basically, I don't share my path with everybody because some people are just not open to that. But I am open. If somebody asks, I will explain. And I usually go with the term Wicca because it's less scary than witchcraft. And that's basically the reason why Gardner and the people above my lineage actually changed and came up with the word Wicca, is so that people wouldn't just get offended right away and take off. They would actually, oh, Wicca? I've never heard of that. Tell me more. Mm-hmm. And so I would probably use the word Wicca to explain my religion and my spiritual path.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it does seem to kind of it doesn't have that same kind of stigma or bite behind it. I think that when most people tend to hear the word witch, they kind of automatically sort of create kind of a scenario in their mind about what you believe and what you practice. So I definitely agree with you. I think that Wicca, and that's probably one of the reasons why so many writers use that term, is because it doesn't carry that same stigma, which today I think is beginning to you could either say it's beginning to fade, but I think actually more people are kind of accepting it and latching onto it because they feel it's having that stigma and that bite behind it is actually empowering, rather than feeling like they have to be apologetic for it, which I think is an interesting turn in the in the social acceptability of it. It's kind of like, F you, I am a witch, and you have a problem with that? Well,
yes.
tough.
Yeah. We don't care. Go away.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of like, well, that's okay. I don't like the name of your religion. Let me see. I know we had written out some questions, so.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. Yes. So speaking of witches and not caring or kind of allowing other people to accept us rather than trying to change our ways to get them to kind of accept us.
Mm-hmm.
I know on a couple of Facebook posts, and I know this happened with a high profile case of a person who was accused of rape and then got sort of led off with kind of what most people felt was a slap on the wrist. But it kind of prompted a lot of witches to take it upon themselves to publicly cast a hex on this particular person. And I know that Raymond Buckland, he kind of spoke out about it, and he actually received a lot of flack for that from some people in the community. Well, community is kind of a loose term. I would say on social media he received some people didn't like him kind of speaking for everybody, and I agree. I don't think none of us do speak for everyone. I think we all have our own individual voice. But how do you feel about that? Do you think that this is something that we as witches, whether or not we're a community or not, people from the outside may view us as a community, and, you know, when one person does one thing, we're kind of everybody judges and paints everybody with the same brush. It's unfortunate, but that's how people view it. What do you think about that, and what do you think are the benefits of that, and what do you think are possible drawbacks of that?
Well, for one thing, I don't think hexing is a good idea because there's the threefold law. But on the other hand, we're not pacifists either. So I would disagree with doing it publicly. But if you're called to do that, then you're called to do that, but you're going to have to pay the price. I didn't like what happened in that particular scenario. I know which one you're talking about, and we can do other things like activism and things to do change of the laws and things like that. It's always good to try to do the mundane first before you try doing the magical. It's always, try, walking down to the store to pick up the milk instead of saying, "Be there milk in my fridge now."
Right. No, I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely agree with you. I think that there are mundane things that we can do in the world which are going to have far greater impact than what we can accomplish on our own or even in a group magically. I think that there is, there is that. It was described to me this way: you can do a spell for finding a job. Like, you can think about the job that you want. You can do all of this. You can cast a spell. You can do all this stuff to get a job. But if you don't actually go out and turn in a decent resume and dress for the part and be confident during an interview, you're probably not going to get the job. You still have to do the footwork for it.
Yeah.
So,
and a lot of people, I think, don't realize that, or just it doesn't quite sink in that, you need to use your feet and walk and do your thing, and along with the magic. It's not going to just manifest, at least not usually manifest all by itself. So, doing the work, sending out the resume, you could do magic around, may I have, a good demeanor, may the interviewer, find, the answers likable and, things like that, but you need to actually do the work, like you said.
And I think so the person's, it was the Brock Turner case that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely I agree with you. I think that there are laws that we can strengthen or put in place that
mm-hmm.
I think have a more long-lasting effect than what we can do on our own.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think the outside world would perceive that when they hear about it or they see it on Twitter, or Facebook, or on social media? How do you think the outside world would perceive that?
As in hexing?
Yeah.
I don't think it's really a good poster child to be putting up on the boards of, this is what witches do, and, that's why I said if you want to do it privately in your own home and, you're willing to pay the consequences, then you're willing to do whatever you're going to do. No one should say yes or no to you. But just remember that you will get walloped if you're doing something negative.
Mm-hmm. And you had touched on earlier about the reed and the threefold law. How do you believe, what is your interpretation of how this affects or can affect doing, say, a hex or doing a spell to help somebody?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think it has an effect on it?
Oh, okay. It can get quite complicated, and I actually do talk about this in the Hidden Children of the Goddess about the threefold law and how it works. I would say that, always ask for permission before doing anything for anyone. If you don't, then you may be working against that person's will. Let's see, 3 times law. If you, basically whatever you put out, whichever is a negative energy or positive energy, is going to come back to you magnified. So it's more advantageous to do good things because you want good things to happen to you versus doing negative things and, spiraling down from there. As in, and it harm none, do it what you will. It's a lot of people think of it as a rule, mm-hmm. and it's not a rule. It's a guideline. It's to help guide us to the right actions. And I think a lot of people have misconceptions about it being a rule, and it's not. It's use your own judgment and try to do as little harm as possible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. I agree. I think that's a good interpretation of the read. That's how I see it too. I see
mm-hmm.
it in the same kind of way of that. It's lost my train of thought.
Well, anyways, it's basically, if you tried to actually live it like a law, it's impossible to live it as a law. Mm-hmm. You have to eat, you get sick, and you take medicine to kill the cold that's attacking your body. So it's impossible. You have to eat, you drink, and do all the things that we do. Just blowing your nose, you're killing things. So that's why it's not a law, it's a guideline.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let me see here. Going back to this.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we can also take questions from anybody in the chat who wants to either pose a question to myself or Moonwater or to both of us or general question. So this is what led you to write this book, How to Be a Wiccan Badass?
Well, as I said, when I was working along the path of Wicca, I didn't have a lot of self-esteem,
Okay.
and I didn't really feel comfortable, doing what witches do. I mean, it came naturally, but I was always afraid that I was going to make a mistake or, something's going to happen or go wrong because I didn't know something. A lot of people are afraid, that I at least have encountered, that are afraid to do spell work because they don't know if they're going to do it right. And that's where a mentor really helps. I'm really into having, face-to-face mentoring because of that reason. The mentor can see that you're working with the energy correctly, you're doing, the focusing correctly and things like that you just can't do from a book or from online. But saying that, books are extremely helpful for those who can't find a mentor. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of wrote this book like I was talking about how I created the formula for making a spell. So you can kind of do your little checkoff list of, what you have in making your spell, and know that you've got your hiney covered for any unexpected stuff, hopefully, mm-hmm. if you've done it right.
Mm-hmm. And
so,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you wouldn't mind giving like a little spoiler, how along that what you just described there, how would you in your book describe to somebody, like, let's say, doing a spell for getting a job?
Getting a job?
Yeah. So you had mentioned kind of like those things, putting those things in place for that.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Where do I have that? Positive friends. I also have rituals for releasing blockages too in here.
Yeah, any examples? Fine. That was just one I was thinking of.
Oh, okay. The formula here in my book is, you have to formulate what do you really want? What do you want to happen? That's basically the first and most important thing. If you don't have a solid idea of what that is, then it's not going to really work. Mm-hmm. The next thing that I put down is what element do you want to use? What do you want to use? Fire because you want to transform something? Do you want to use water because it's more of an emotional issue? But, think of the element that you want to incorporate into your spell. The next thing I would say is on my list here is, once you've got those two things down, what can represent the element in your spell? So like if you were doing a spell for air, you could have incense or a feather or something that would represent air. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, now you've got all these wonderful like little things that you want and these items that you wish you had. What do you really have on hand? Mm-hmm. That's the next thing. What do you actually have to work with? Because you can make anything do. Then you want to come up with what words do you want to say, craft how you want to actually put the spell and stitch it together with your wording. And so, that's basically, and then all that comes down to the whole thing of what do you want to happen, which comes back to the beginning. Mm-hmm. Put all that together and make sure you put a harm none clause or some kind of clause in there, because you don't want anything negative to happen to anybody. Like for good for all, or better for, something like that.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like a carrier, just to make sure, like, have the intention happen, but as long as it doesn't really cause anyone adverse harm, or mm-hmm. putting the carrier like that into that. Yeah.
And I like, one of my favorite phrases is for this or better. Because sometimes you think that you can only get X when you really, the gods are like, no, you can really have Y too. Mm-hmm. So that's why you make it more than you expected out of it if you use that term.
Mm-hmm. And I like the fact that what you did, as you were describing that, you were saying, what do you have on hand? Rather than making like a grocery list. Okay, so, I got to go out and get this gold candle, and I got to get this statue of so-and-so. And having this really complex, growing list of things that you absolutely have, it's kind of like, well, maybe what you can do is actually like, look around the house. What do you have? Do you have, this? Or can it substitute that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that you can substitute. Because a lot of like the old grimoires, they have all these like really hard ingredients defined, and it's like, that's not going to help you. So if you come up with, but dragon's blood ink is just what I need and everything, and it's like, but I don't have it, so what do I do?
And you may have used up your last Eye of Newt. So
yes,
we go through Eye of Newt just like crazy.
Yeah.
So
don't forget the tongue of dog.
Yes, the tongue of dog and Eye of Newt. Yeah, exactly. I like how you describe that. So I mentioned in the chat we're getting about time that we could ask questions. So if anybody has any questions for either myself or Moonwater, we'll be happy to answer them. Let me see. So what do you have coming up, or what are you thinking about doing in the future? I know you have a YouTube page that is linked down below, and you have a website. What are some other things you have coming up in the future, or thoughts you have, or ideas?
Well, for one thing, I want to start doing more videos. That's one thing I'm hoping to do. It's, where's the time?
Yes, right.
The big thing. I'm also starting to work on another book, and haven't quite gotten together what it's. The whole thought has not quite crystallized yet, but I'm getting to that point. So I'm working on that. I'm hoping to maybe do some workshops in the future, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. And I know that on your website on your YouTube page, you have a couple of interviews. So I know you have. Yeah. You interviewed. Well, I can't remember exactly.
I interviewed Rachel Watcher, and I also did Anna Korn.
Okay,
and those two interviews were really fascinating. And if anybody has any questions after the program, I am one of the most viewed authors on Quora, and I do answer questions on Quora.
Oh, okay. So now, what is Quora? I've never heard of that.
Oh, Quora is a website where you can ask any question that you need or want to know, and experts in the fields will answer that for them. And you'll get Nobel-winning prize winners that take time out to answer questions that interest them. So it's really, it's pretty amazing, really.
Wow.
So.
Okay. And so is it like www.quora.com? Is that pretty much like the website? Oh, okay.
Yep.
And so what do you just go there and create like a username and password and log in?
Can just log in, and there's a whole lot of content there. So you can like type up something, and most likely somebody's answered questions like that or the question that you're looking for. But if it can't find anything on what you're trying to ask, it'll ask you if you want to ask that question to somebody or just put it out there. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to have to check that website out then. So, let's see. Well, sounds like this is maybe more of a comment, but maybe it might lead into something. Loveless AI says, if there is one thing I was told when I when it came to spell casting, a lady told me that every spell that exists was made up. So I'm assuming what she means is that somebody had to create a spell somewhere down the line. So every single spell is essentially written by someone.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be true. I mean, they all have to come from somewhere, so.
Right. Yeah, because I know, like, there's some books, like, there's this one thick book. It's called the Encyclopedia of Magic Formulas and Spells or something like that. But it's like, it's nothing but spells in the whole thing. And, and I think this question came up in a Facebook group I was in once. And somebody asked sort of a similar question to that, but they were saying, like, is it okay to use spells that were written by somebody else? And I think a lot of people commented on it. And one of the comments was, if you should try to make it your own. Like, you can take that, but still try to kind of tweak it a little bit to make it your own, so you kind of have your own little spin on it, which I think is kind of a good idea.
Yeah, and also, you know, just because one person wrote a spell doesn't mean it's going to be the best fit for you. So I agree with that statement that you want to try to make it your own. So let's say you're trying to get do a confidence spell, and the spell, you know, calls for, I don't know, a blue piece of fabric, but when you think of that fabric, you think of, you know, the 6th grade year-old, you know, girl that used to harass you, and she always used to wear that color blue. Not going to help. So you need to kind of change it up a little bit, you know? So.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. So if something in that spell that the person who created that spell may have an association with something where you have a possibly even polar opposite association with it, or maybe an association has a different meaning to it that would actually interfere with the spell that you are trying to create.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's a good point. So let's see. So you'd mentioned the website, or excuse me, the YouTube page that you're trying to. Are you pretty much going to be doing like educational videos, or possibly more interviews, or?
Possibly a little both, but right now because it's just easier. I'm doing more educational because a lot of people seem to like that's what they need. So that's what I'm planning on doing. Okay.
If you do, I know that there is a lot of information out there on Wicca and witchcraft. I mean, there's a lot of people who do pay YouTube videos on that. And one of the things that I realized, because I was going to try to do kind of like maybe a basic, you know, Wicca 101 video series, but I realized that it was so inundated. There was so much information out there that I decided I kind of like stepped it up, and I said, well, maybe I'll just do kind of like a more advanced. And then I did the Wicca 2.0 series. And so I kind of stayed away from that side just because there's so much information out there. But one of the things I find that there's a lot of information out there from that individual person's perspective, and that individual's perspective can be very different from like a traditional Wicca practice or another type of practice. So I think that if somebody is interested in looking for various things, I think it's good to understand where that person is coming from. So you kind of understand, okay, so this is kind of like maybe a person, they have background in root work or voodoo, or maybe they have kind of like a pagan, like a Celtic or a Norse pagan background, and then maybe you have somebody who's more into like eclectic Wicca and then traditional Wicca. So people kind of get a different viewpoint of different perspectives of how to do something. And then from there, they can kind of focus in on what it is that they really want to pursue and study and learn more about.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. Let's see. So, is there anything you'd like to mention or say? I know that people can get your book on Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was one other website you had mentioned. Was it Amazon?
They can order it through Barnes & Noble or createspace.com. Yeah, usually you can order it through any bookstore if you don't like Amazon, but because it's just easier and gets out to more people, that's where I put my book at the moment.
Okay. All right. Let me see. So, anything else you'd like to mention?
Well, I mentioned Quora.
Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to mention that you can go to Amazon and actually get to my author page, which puts up a scroll of my blog posts and all the other things that I'm doing too. So that's one way to kind of get an idea of, who I am and what I'm putting out.
And that was one thing I tried to find. What is the name of your blog, or how could somebody find it?
For Amazon?
No, your blog.
Oh, my blog? Just hiddenchildrenofthegoddess.com.
Oh, okay. So from your website they can go to it?
Yeah, so just like the book. And if you don't have that one memorized or it's too hard, it also is under goddesshasyourback.com.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. That's there.
Okay.
So I think Goddess Has Your Back is easier to remember. So
right.
It's just I did Hidden Children of the Goddess because I thought that was a really cool name, and then I thought, I should probably put Goddess Has Your Back because it's just easier to remember.
Mm. Yeah, it is easier to remember. Hidden Children of the Goddess. It's not too. I think it's a little longer. Maybe you have to remember like one extra word or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also a term that a lot of people don't really use.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's probably where my nerdish part of the history of the craft shows. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Definitely. All right, let me see. What else? I know that we had touched on that. I don't know if we touched on this, but I know you had mentioned some authors who you feel are good people for somebody who might be possibly interested in studying about the craft, Wicca and witchcraft in general. But I don't know if we had touched on like some of the authors who influenced you. I know you had mentioned you had gone into the bookstore and you had asked for books on witchcraft, and the lady had mentioned Scott Cunningham to you. But were there other books that you picked up that influenced you? I know you had mentioned like Gerald Gardner and Doreen Valiente and some of the other books that's on your website. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have a suggested reading list on my website if somebody wants to start reading about witchcraft or Wicca. I think one of the other ones was definitely Gerald B. Gardner. Doreen Valiente, Scott Cunningham he's also a really nice author. He explains things pretty simply and is easy to read. Starhawk, I read a lot of her books when I was getting into the craft. So, yeah.
And I know, I don't think Starhawk has she written, I know the last book that I remember that she wrote was Dreaming in the Dark. I don't know if maybe she's kind of stepped back from writing for a while, because I don't know if she's written anything since then.
I haven't kept up with it, honestly. I've been busy with my own books, so.
Yeah, 6 of them.
I can't believe it, so.
Yeah.
6. But there they are.
There they are. They didn't write themselves.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, I know that Starhawk is she was active in the reclaiming tradition, and I know she does the spiral dance here in San Francisco every Halloween. Yeah. So okay. I think that's it was really nice to talk with you again, Moonwater, and I was just amazed when you mentioned that you had written another book, because I think we had another interview just like maybe a year ago about your 5th book that came out. So it's amazing that you've written a 6th. Yeah. So it's amazing that in 1 year's time you wrote another book.
It seems to be about a year.
Yeah. I mean, that's for me, that's just amazing. Like, I've tried to think about like writing a book, but it just seems like it would really be a lot of work for me, and I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is a lot of work. I'm sure it takes a lot of dedication.
Well, I also get a lot of help, so.
Oh, that's good.
I mean, I could not do it without, my support system at all. So it's not a I'm pulling them out by myself. I have people supporting me because, as I said, dyslexia, you wouldn't be able to read it if I just wrote it by myself.
Oh, yeah. So do you have somebody who's like an editor who kind of like helps you to, like you'll write it out and then they kind of help put it into a structure that people can read, or is that what you mean? Yeah,
and they fix my spelling errors, and it's a lot of times the computer doesn't even know what the heck I'm trying to say. It's like, that's pretty bad. But I have editors, and they help put things in order and put things where, try to explain, if they don't understand it, I try to explain what I'm trying to say, and then they help me write it in an easier way to understand what I'm trying to get across.
Okay, well, that's definitely helpful, especially when to make sure that everything, whatever you're writing, people can definitely understand. So yeah, I think that is pretty much about it. If there's anything you'd like to say before we go, or I think we pretty much touched on everything.
Just, if you want to contact me, AskAWitchNow@gmail.com, and you can also reach me on my blog, Hidden Children of the Goddess, or goddesshasyourback.com, and you can find me on Amazon.
Or Quora, too. Quora.com.
Quora, too. Yeah. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Moonwater. It was great talking with you again, and we'll probably be chatting again another year from now when you write your 7th book.
Yes.
All right. We didn't have any questions from the chat, so looks like we're good. So, all right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you, Moonwater, for being my guest again. I really appreciate it. This was a lot of fun, and again, we'll probably do it again another year from now. So.